5 Apache women appeared at his door. What happened next shocked the whole town. People in town often called him the quiet man because he rarely went to social events, didn't join clubs, and preferred spending his evenings alone with a cup of tea and a book. John wasn't lonely exactly. He enjoyed solitude, but his life had been simple and predictable for years. That is, until one evening changed everything. It was late autumn, and the sun had just dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink. A cool wind swept through the trees, rustling the dry leaves on the ground. John had just finished cooking dinner and was settling into his favorite armchair when a soft but insistent knock echoed through his small, wooden house. He frowned. Visitors were rare. Even during the day, it was unusual for anyone to come by without calling first. He got up slowly, his slippers making soft sounds on the wooden floor. As he approached the door, the knocking stopped, replaced by a strange silence. He hesitated for a moment, then turned the knob. What he saw made him freeze. Standing on his porch were 5 women. They were tall and strong, with calm, serious expressions. Their clothing was unlike anything John had seen before. Brightly colored dresses with intricate patterns, feathers in their hair, and beads around their necks caught the fading light in a way that seemed almost magical. Their eyes held a quiet strength, as if they carried stories far older than the town itself. For a moment, John could only stare. His mind raced with questions. Who were they? Why were they here? How had they found his house? He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. One of the women, standing slightly ahead of the others, stepped forward. She spoke in a soft voice, yet it carried a weight that immediately commanded attention. "Are you John Miller?" she asked. "Yes, I am," he replied cautiously. "Can I help you?" The woman nodded. "We need your help. It is urgent and it cannot wait." John blinked, still unsure if he was dreaming. I'm not sure I understand. Help with what?" The other women didn't speak at first. They stood quietly, their presence both calming and intense. John noticed the way they moved in unison, the way they seemed aware of every detail around them. It was almost as if they were connected to something much larger than the small town itself. Finally, the woman in front spoke again. "We are here to recover something important. Something that belongs to our people. Without it, much will be lost." John's heart started to beat faster. He didn't fully understand what she meant, but he felt a strange pull in his chest. There was urgency in her voice, but also respect. This wasn't just a random visit. These women had chosen him for a reason. I don't know if I can help," he said. "I don't even know what you're talking about." The woman smiled faintly, but it was not a happy smile. It was the kind of smile that comes with patience and understanding. "We know. That is why we came to you. We believe you are the right person to help us." John hesitated. His mind was spinning. He wanted to close the door and pretend this never happened. But something inside him, a feeling he couldn't explain, urged him to listen. He stepped aside, gesturing for them to enter. The women moved gracefully inside, filling the small living room with their quiet presence. John watched as they settled themselves, noticing small details. The patterns on their dresses, the way their hair was braided, the gentle confidence in their movements. They were unlike anyone he had ever met. One of the women, younger than the rest, carried a small bundle wrapped in a cloth. She placed it carefully on the table as if it were fragile and sacred. The first woman spoke again. "We are from the Apache Nation. Our people have a history that stretches back hundreds of years. We are here because something precious to us has been taken. It must be returned, and we need your help to find it." John listened, trying to make sense of their words. He had read about Native American tribes in school, but he had never imagined meeting anyone from one of the tribes, let alone under such mysterious circumstances. His mind raced with doubts. Was this some kind of scam? A story? But something in the woman's eyes, the seriousness, the calm confidence, made him feel that she was telling the truth. What exactly do you need me to do?" he asked finally. The woman glanced at the others, then back at John. "We need someone who understands this town, someone who can move without drawing too much attention. We cannot go to the authorities. They do not understand the importance of what we seek. You must help us locate it quietly." John felt a chill run down his spine. He had never been involved in anything remotely like this. His life was ordinary, safe, and predictable. Yet here were 5 women, strangers from a culture he barely knew, asking him to step into a world he could not yet see. He swallowed hard, trying to steady his racing thoughts. I don't know if I can do that. I've never been involved in anything like this." The woman smiled again, a small, knowing smile. "You will know when the time comes. For now, all we ask is that you listen and trust us." There was silence in the room. John felt the weight of the moment, as if the air itself had grown heavier. He realized this was no ordinary evening. Something extraordinary was unfolding in front of him, something that would change his life forever. Over the next hour, the women spoke about their journey, their culture, and the significance of the object they sought. They shared stories of their ancestors, of struggles and triumphs, of traditions passed down through generations. John listened intently, captivated by their words. He felt a growing sense of responsibility, even though he barely understood the full story. By the time the women prepared to leave, John had made a decision. He didn't fully understand why, but he knew he couldn't turn them away. He would help them. It was as simple and as terrifying as that. As he closed the door behind them, he realized that nothing in his life would ever be the same. 5 Apache women had appeared at his door, bringing with them a mystery, a mission, and a lesson he could never have imagined. And while he didn't yet know the dangers and challenges that lay ahead, he felt a spark of purpose, a sense that he was about to step into a story much larger than himself. That night, John sat by the window, staring at the darkening sky. He thought about the women, about their mission, and about the strange twist of fate that had brought them to him. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was certain. Cedar Hollow was no longer an ordinary town, and his life was no longer ordinary either. As the wind whispered through the trees, John felt a mix of fear, curiosity, and anticipation. He was ready, even if he didn't fully realize it yet, to follow the path the women had set before him. And so, the quiet life he had known came to an end, replaced by a journey that would test him, teach him, and ultimately change the way he saw the world forever. The next morning, John woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside his window. The air was crisp and cool, a gentle reminder that autumn was in full swing. He brewed himself a cup of coffee and sat by the kitchen table, thinking about the events of the previous evening. The visit from the 5 Apache women played over and over in his mind. He couldn't stop thinking about the urgency in their eyes, the quiet strength in their voices, and the mysterious object they were trying to recover. Despite the normalcy of the morning, a sense of unease lingered. John knew that helping these women wouldn't be simple. He had lived his life carefully, avoiding risks and surprises, but now he felt as though the world he knew had shifted. The quiet town of Cedar Hollow seemed suddenly full of hidden stories and unknown dangers. John took a deep breath and reminded himself of one thing: he had promised to help. That promise, simple as it was, carried a weight that John could not ignore. He finished his coffee quickly, washed the cup, and stepped outside. The sky was a clear blue, and sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the ground. As he walked down the narrow path toward the edge of town, he tried to imagine what the women's journey must have been like. How had they traveled all this way? What had they faced to reach him? He didn't have to wait long to find out. Around mid-morning, he noticed a small group of townspeople gathered near the main street. Curious, John approached quietly. As he got closer, he realized that some of the people were whispering about the 5 Apache women. There were questions and rumors spreading like wildfire. Some people were skeptical, believing that John was exaggerating or imagining the story. Others were genuinely curious, wondering what the women wanted and why they had come to such a quiet town. John felt a flicker of anxiety. He had hoped to keep the women's visit private, at least for now, to avoid unnecessary attention. But word traveled fast in a small town, and it seemed that Cedar Hollow was already buzzing with speculation. He decided it would be best to act carefully and discreetly, at least until he understood more about the women's mission. Later that afternoon, the women returned to John's house. They moved with the same quiet confidence as the day before, but there was a sense of urgency in their steps. John greeted them at the door, his heart pounding. He could tell immediately that something had changed. They had not come just to explain their story, they had come to act. "We need to leave soon," the woman who had spoken first said. "The object is not far from here, but it is in a place that requires caution. We cannot go unnoticed, and we need someone who knows this town." John nodded, feeling both nervous and determined. "I'll help," he said. "Tell me what I need to do." The women exchanged glances, then one of them handed John a small notebook. Inside were sketches and notes about a location on the outskirts of town, a place that John recognized immediately. It was an old abandoned warehouse, long since forgotten by most of the townspeople. The building had a reputation for being creepy, and children often dared each other to go near it, but no one ever actually entered. "This is where the object is," the woman explained. "We believe it is being kept inside. You must guide us, but you must also be careful. There may be people who do not understand its value, people who might try to stop us." John felt a chill run down his spine. He had never been involved in anything dangerous, and the thought of confronting unknown individuals in an abandoned warehouse was terrifying. Yet at the same time, he felt a strong sense of responsibility. These women had trusted him, and he could not let them down. They set off together, moving quietly through the streets of Cedar Hollow. John led them through back alleys and narrow lanes, avoiding main roads and prying eyes. He noticed that people in town were watching them from a distance, whispering among themselves. The presence of the women had already sparked curiosity and suspicion, and John realized that they had to act quickly before the situation attracted too much attention. As they approached the outskirts of town, John felt a mixture of fear and excitement. The forested area near the warehouse was dense, with tall trees and thick undergrowth. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, creating patterns on the ground that seemed almost magical. The women moved silently, their eyes scanning the surroundings with the precision of someone who was used to traveling in unknown or dangerous territories. Finally, they reached the abandoned warehouse. The building was old and worn, with broken windows and graffiti covering the walls. The doors were slightly ajar, as if inviting them inside. John hesitated at the entrance, feeling a surge of nervous energy. He had no idea what they would find inside, but he knew that turning back was not an option. The women signaled for him to follow, and they stepped inside with careful, measured movements. The interior was dark and dusty, with old machinery and discarded crates scattered across the floor. The air smelled of damp wood and rust, and the silence was almost overwhelming. John felt a shiver run down his spine, but he forced himself to move forward. They reached a small room at the back of the warehouse. Inside, on a wooden crate, was a small, intricately carved box. The women's eyes lit up when they saw it, and John could sense their relief. They approached the box reverently, as if it held the weight of generations. One of the women gently lifted the lid, revealing a beautifully crafted artifact. Its surface was polished and detailed, with symbols and patterns that spoke of history and tradition. "This is it," the first woman whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "This has been missing for too long. Our people will finally have it returned." John watched as the women carefully examined the artifact. He noticed the pride and reverence in their movements, the way they treated it as if it were alive. For the first time, he began to understand the depth of their mission. This was not just about a simple object. It was about preserving a culture, honoring history, and restoring something that had been lost. As they prepared to leave the warehouse, John felt a sense of awe and respect. He realized that his life, which had always been ordinary and predictable, was now intertwined with something extraordinary. These women had entrusted him with a task that went beyond himself, and he felt honored to be a part of it. They moved quickly and quietly back through the forest, taking care to avoid being seen. John noticed the determination in the women's faces, the way they communicated without words, and the unspoken understanding that connected them. He felt a deep respect for their courage and wisdom, and he knew that this experience would stay with him forever. By the time they returned to John's house, the sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the town. The women thanked him quietly, their expressions calm but filled with gratitude. John felt a mix of relief, pride, and wonder. He had faced his fears, guided them to the artifact, and witnessed a part of the world he had never known. That night, as he sat by the window watching the stars appear in the sky, John reflected on the day's events. He realized that life was full of unexpected encounters and extraordinary opportunities. Sometimes, the most remarkable experiences came when you least expected them, knocking gently at your door and inviting you to step into something bigger than yourself. John knew that this was only the beginning. The women's mission was far from over, and there were still challenges ahead. But he also knew that he had discovered something important about himself, that he was capable of courage, compassion, and understanding in ways he had never imagined. And so, the quiet town of Cedar Hollow, once predictable and ordinary, became a place of mystery, history, and connection. John Miller, the quiet man at the edge of town, had taken his first steps into a story that would change his life forever. The appearance of the 5 Apache women at his door was no longer just a memory. It was the beginning of a journey, one that promised lessons, challenges, and discoveries beyond anything he had ever known. The days following the discovery of the artifact were not quiet for John Miller. Though he had helped the women retrieve the object, he quickly realized that their mission was far from complete. The artifact, small yet powerful in its significance, needed to be returned to the Apache community safely. But the town of Cedar Hollow, with its small streets and watchful neighbors, had begun to buzz with curiosity. John understood that they had to move carefully, or the mission could fail entirely. John spent the first morning after the warehouse visit reflecting on what had happened. He was still in awe of the women's courage and dedication. They had traveled so far, faced unknown dangers, and entrusted him with something immensely important. Yet, as he prepared breakfast that morning, he felt a creeping unease. Helping the women had brought him into a world he didn't fully understand, a world full of hidden dangers and secrets. It wasn't long before John's fears began to take shape. He noticed a few unfamiliar faces in town, people he had never seen before, asking questions and observing him subtly. It seemed that news of the women's presence and the artifact had spread, drawing attention from individuals who had no right to it. Some were curious, some suspicious, and a few seemed almost threatening. John realized that the journey ahead would not be easy. When the women arrived later that afternoon, their expressions were serious. They had sensed the same tension in the town. John greeted them cautiously, knowing that whatever lay ahead would require courage, intelligence, and discretion. "We cannot wait any longer," said the first woman, her voice calm but firm. "There are people who seek the artifact. They do not understand its value and they will stop at nothing to possess it." John's heart raced. Who are they? What do they want? "They are collectors, opportunists who do not care about history, heritage, or respect," she explained. "They see only what is valuable in money or power. If they find the artifact before it reaches our people, the history it carries may be lost forever. The gravity of the situation settled over John. He had always lived a life of predictability and safety, but now he was faced with a challenge that demanded bravery he didn't know he possessed. Yet, as he looked at the women, he saw no fear, only determination. Their calm confidence gave him strength, and he knew he could not falter. The next step, they explained, was to transport the artifact out of Cedar Hollow and toward a location where it could be secured temporarily. The journey would not be simple. They would need to avoid attention, move quietly, and outsmart anyone who might be watching. John's knowledge of the town became invaluable. He knew secret paths, hidden lanes, and old routes that few others remembered. As they prepared to leave, John felt a mixture of anxiety and excitement. The task ahead was dangerous, but it was also meaningful. He had never imagined that his quiet life would intersect with a story of such importance, a story that spanned generations and continents. Yet there was no turning back now. The first challenge appeared almost immediately. As they moved through the town, John noticed a car parked near the main street that had not been there before. Two men sat inside, observing the neighborhood intently. Their eyes followed every passerby, but John noticed the way they lingered on the women. He whispered a warning, and the women nodded subtly, understanding the danger without words. They changed their route, moving through back alleys and narrow paths that John had once thought were useless. The women's knowledge of movement, of sensing danger, impressed him. It was clear that they had faced challenges before, and their experience gave him courage. Still, the tension in the air was palpable. Every shadow, every sound seemed like a potential threat. As they reached the edge of town, the real test began. The terrain became rough and uneven, with dense woods and hidden gullies. John led the way, ensuring that their path remained hidden. The women moved silently, their senses alert to the slightest disturbance. For hours, they navigated through the forest, the artifact carefully protected in a cloth bundle. John's muscles ached from the constant alertness, and his heart raced every time he thought they might be seen. At one point, they paused near a small stream to rest. John crouched beside the water, trying to catch his breath. One of the younger women knelt nearby, her hands brushing the water's surface as if drawing strength from it. She spoke softly, almost to herself, about the history of the artifact, about its journey through generations, and about the responsibility it carried. John listened quietly, struck by the depth of meaning that this small object held. "It is more than a piece of history," she said, looking up at him. "It is a bridge between the past and the future. Without it, stories will be forgotten, lessons will be lost, and our people will lose a part of themselves." John felt a lump in his throat. He had never considered that an object could carry such weight, that a mission could touch something so deeply human. He realized that helping these women was not just about completing a task. It was about protecting something sacred, something that connected generations and cultures. The journey continued, and as night fell, their path became even more treacherous. Shadows moved in the forest and strange sounds echoed around them. John's imagination ran wild, imagining threats lurking in the darkness. But the women remained calm, their presence a steadying force. They communicated through small gestures, silently guiding each other and John through the maze of trees and undergrowth. Suddenly, they heard a noise ahead, footsteps, careful but deliberate. John froze, his heart pounding. The women signaled him to stay quiet. They crouched behind a large fallen tree, their eyes scanning the darkness. Two figures appeared, carrying flashlights and moving cautiously. John realized immediately that these were the people who had been following them: collectors, thieves, anyone who wanted the artifact for selfish reasons. The women whispered instructions, and John followed their lead. They moved silently, using the shadows and terrain to stay hidden. Every step required precision and concentration. For the first time in his life, John felt the adrenaline of true danger, not in a story or movie, but in reality. The women's calm confidence gave him courage, but his mind raced with questions. What if they were discovered? What if the artifact was taken? Hours passed like this, moving through the forest, avoiding the figures who seemed determined to find them. Finally, they reached a small clearing where a cabin stood, an old, abandoned building that looked like it had not been used in decades. The women explained that this would be a temporary safe place for the artifact, a location where it could be hidden until they could continue their journey. John helped them carry the bundle inside, carefully placing it in a secure spot. The women worked quickly, ensuring that it was protected from view. Once they were done, they sat together in the dim light, catching their breath and reflecting on the challenges they had faced. John felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. They had succeeded, but he knew the mission was far from over. That night, as they kept watch over the artifact, John realized how much he had learned from the women. He had witnessed courage, patience, and determination in ways he had never experienced before. The danger of the day had taught him that life was unpredictable, that ordinary routines could be disrupted by extraordinary events, and that bravery often came from the quiet moments of perseverance rather than dramatic actions. In the early hours of the morning, John stepped outside to look at the stars. The forest was silent, and the world seemed peaceful once more, but he knew that the danger had not disappeared. The people following them were still out there, and the journey to return the artifact safely was only beginning. As he returned inside, he saw the women quietly preparing for the next stage of their mission. John felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and the unknown, yet he had also discovered strength he never knew he had. The quiet man of Cedar Hollow was no longer the same. He had become a part of something larger than himself, a story that carried the weight of history, culture, and human connection. The days ahead promised new challenges, but John felt ready. The 5 Apache women had shown him that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. And as they rested for the night, he knew that whatever came next, he would face it with the same determination, trust, and respect that had brought them this far. The days that followed were some of the most intense John Miller had ever experienced. Cedar Hollow, once quiet and predictable, had now become a town of secrets, whispers, and cautious movements. The mission to return the artifact safely to the Apache community was proving far more complicated than John had imagined. Every day brought new challenges, new dangers, and new lessons, forcing him to grow in ways he had never expected. John spent the first morning reflecting on what had happened so far. He had guided the women to the warehouse, helped retrieve the artifact, and navigated through the forest to a temporary safe place. Yet, as he looked out over the town, he realized that the danger had not disappeared. Word of the artifact's presence had spread quietly but surely. People were curious, suspicious, and some, he feared, might try to interfere for their own gain. The women arrived at his house again, their faces calm but resolute. There was no fear in their eyes, only determination. John greeted them, feeling the weight of responsibility more keenly than ever. They had trusted him to be careful, to guide them safely, and now that trust felt heavier than any burden he had ever carried. "We must move soon," the first woman said. "The artifact cannot stay here for long. Those who follow us are patient, but we cannot underestimate them. Every day it remains hidden here increases the risk of discovery." John nodded. "I understand. What's the next step?" The women explained that the artifact needed to be transported farther from Cedar Hollow, to a place where it could be protected until arrangements could be made to return it to their community. The journey would require careful planning, quick thinking, and constant vigilance. John realized that this was not just a task of carrying an object. It was a challenge that demanded courage, intelligence, and trust in the women's experience. They began preparing for the journey immediately. Supplies were gathered quietly, routes were mapped in John's notebook, and contingency plans were made in case they were followed. John noticed how organized and disciplined the women were. Every movement had a purpose, every word had weight. It was clear that they had done this before, though perhaps under different circumstances, and that their skill and knowledge were crucial for the success of the mission. The first major challenge came almost immediately. As they left John's house under the cover of early morning fog, he noticed a shadow moving near the edge of the forest. His heart skipped a beat. The figure was distant, but there was no mistaking that someone was watching. The women noticed it too. Without a word, they signaled for him to stay quiet and follow their lead. They altered their route, taking paths through dense undergrowth and hidden clearings. Every step required care. John could feel his pulse pounding in his chest. He had never been so alert in his life, noticing every sound, every movement, every subtle change in the environment. The women moved like phantoms through the forest, their experience and calm presence giving him courage. By midday, they had reached a small, abandoned farm on the outskirts of a neighboring town. The buildings were old, with weathered wood and cracked windows, but they offered the perfect temporary hiding place for the artifact. John helped the women secure the object, ensuring it was hidden from view and protected from anyone who might stumble upon it. The women worked quickly and efficiently, their movements precise and deliberate. As they rested, one of the women spoke quietly to John. "You have shown courage today, more than many do in a lifetime, but courage alone is not enough. You must also trust your instincts and understand that every choice has consequences." John listened, realizing the truth in her words. He had relied on his knowledge of the town and his willingness to follow the women's lead, but he now understood that every decision carried weight. A wrong move could jeopardize not only the artifact, but the safety of everyone involved. The pressure was immense, yet he also felt a growing sense of purpose. For the first time in his life, he was part of something larger than himself. The following days tested John in ways he had never anticipated. The women continued their journey, moving cautiously through forests, fields, and small towns. They faced obstacles at every turn, unexpected roadblocks, curious locals, and the constant threat of discovery. John learned to navigate these challenges, relying on his growing understanding of the women's methods and his own ability to think quickly under pressure. One evening, as they camped in a secluded clearing, John noticed the tension in the group. The younger woman who had first spoken about the artifact's importance looked worried. "We are close," she said softly, "but there are still dangers ahead. You must be ready for anything." John nodded, feeling both fear and resolve. He had come to respect the women deeply. Their courage, wisdom, and calm in the face of uncertainty were inspiring. He realized that he had learned more about bravery, patience, and determination in the past few days than he had in all his years of quiet living. The next morning, the true test of their journey arrived. As they moved along a narrow forest path, they encountered a group of men who appeared to be searching for something or someone. John's heart raced. The women immediately assessed the situation and signaled for him to hide behind a cluster of trees. They moved silently, blending with the shadows, their eyes sharp and alert. The men passed by, seemingly unaware of the group hiding nearby. John felt a mixture of relief and awe. The women had managed to navigate the situation without confrontation, relying on skill, patience, and strategy. He realized that courage was not always about fighting or confrontation. It was often about understanding, timing, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. As they continued their journey, John noticed changes within himself. He felt more confident, more capable, and more aware of the world around him. The mission had forced him to confront fears he didn't know he had, to think critically under pressure, and to act with responsibility and care. He had grown in ways that were both challenging and rewarding. The women, too, seemed to recognize his growth. Their trust in him deepened, and their communication became more seamless. John felt a strong bond forming, not just through shared purpose, but through mutual respect and understanding. He realized that the journey was as much about personal growth and connection as it was about the artifact itself. Finally, after several days of careful travel, they reached a safe location, a remote lodge owned by a trusted friend of the women. Here, the artifact could be protected until arrangements could be made for its return to the Apache community. John helped the women secure the object, ensuring it was hidden from view and well guarded. As they rested in the lodge, the women spoke of the importance of the artifact and the lessons it carried. "This journey is not just about recovering what was lost," the first woman said. "It is about understanding our past, protecting our heritage, and ensuring that the knowledge and stories of our people are not forgotten. You have been part of that, John. You have helped preserve something sacred." John felt a deep sense of pride and humility. He had started this journey as a quiet, ordinary man, unaware of the extraordinary events that would unfold. Now, he understood the significance of the mission, the responsibility he had carried, and the courage he had discovered within himself. The days at the lodge were also a time for reflection. John spent hours listening to the women's stories, learning about their culture, their struggles, and the resilience of their people. He realized that the artifact represented more than history. It represented identity, memory, and the strength of a community that had survived countless challenges. As the time to continue the journey approached, John felt a mixture of anticipation and sadness. He had grown attached to the women, admired their strength, and learned invaluable lessons from them. He knew that the final stages of the mission would be challenging, but he also felt ready. The experiences of the past days had prepared him for whatever lay ahead. That night, as he looked out over the quiet forest from the lodge window, John reflected on the journey so far. He had faced danger, uncertainty, and fear. He had learned to trust himself, to act with courage, and to understand the value of wisdom, patience, and careful planning. The mission had changed him in ways he could never have imagined. John knew that the artifact's safe return was still the ultimate goal, but he also understood that the journey itself was a lesson in resilience, connection, and growth. The quiet man of Cedar Hollow was no longer the same. He had discovered a strength he never knew he had, a sense of purpose that transcended his ordinary life, and a respect for the courage and wisdom of the women who had chosen to trust him. As the night deepened and the forest grew still, John felt a sense of calm determination. He was ready for the challenges ahead, ready to face whatever dangers might come, and ready to continue the journey with the women who had transformed his life. The mission was far from over, but he knew that he had grown, learned, and changed in ways that would remain with him forever. The final stage of the journey began early in the morning. John Miller woke to the soft light of dawn filtering through the trees outside the lodge. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth. He felt a quiet anticipation, a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Today would be the day the artifact was finally returned to its rightful place, or at least moved closer to safety. The women gathered quietly, their movements calm and deliberate. They packed their supplies, checked the artifact, and prepared themselves for the journey ahead. John watched them closely, feeling a deep respect for their discipline and focus. Over the past days, he had learned more than he could ever have imagined about courage, patience, and the strength of the human spirit. Now, he was ready to put all that knowledge into action. "We must move carefully," the first woman said, her voice steady. "This is the most dangerous part of the journey. Those who have been following us may try to intervene, and we must be ready for anything." John nodded. He had learned to trust her judgment completely. Together they left the lodge, moving through the forest with the same quiet precision that had guided them so far. Every step was careful, every movement deliberate. John's senses were alert to every sound, every shadow, every sign of danger. He realized how much he had grown over the past days. Where once he might have panicked, he now felt composed and focused. The journey took them through rugged terrain, across streams and fields, and along narrow forest paths. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and the forest came alive with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves. Despite the beauty around him, John remained alert. The threat of being discovered was ever present, and he knew that a single mistake could jeopardize the mission. As they moved, the women shared more stories about the artifact and the history it represented. They spoke of ancestors who had protected their culture through hardships, of traditions that had survived wars and displacement, and of the importance of preserving knowledge for future generations. John listened intently, feeling a profound sense of connection to the history and resilience they described. Hours into the journey, they reached the edge of a wide river. The current was swift, and the banks were muddy and slippery. The women paused, assessing the safest way to cross. John felt a flicker of anxiety. Crossing the river would be difficult, and the artifact had to remain safe. One of the women stepped forward and examined the water carefully. "We must cross here," she said, pointing to a shallow section near a cluster of rocks. "Take care, John. Balance and caution are essential." John nodded, swallowing hard. He followed the women carefully, stepping onto the rocks one at a time. The water rushed past, cold and forceful, and he had to focus on every movement to avoid slipping. The women moved with practiced ease, guiding John when necessary. After a tense few minutes, they reached the other side safely, and John felt a rush of relief. The sense of accomplishment was profound. This was not just a physical journey, but a test of courage and focus. As the sun began to descend, casting a golden glow over the landscape, they approached the final destination. It was a small, secluded area on the outskirts of a larger town, where trusted members of the Apache community had arranged for the artifact to be received. The location was secure, quiet, and hidden from view, perfect for ensuring the artifact's safety. John's heart pounded as they approached. He had been part of the journey from the beginning, and now the moment of resolution was near. The women carefully lifted the artifact from its protective covering and placed it on a flat, clean surface. Their eyes shone with emotion, pride, relief, and joy. "This is it," the first woman whispered. "The artifact is finally safe. Our history, our heritage, our stories, everything it represents will be preserved for future generations." John felt a lump in his throat. He looked at the women, at the care with which they handled the object, and at the sense of accomplishment that radiated from them. He realized that this journey had been about far more than a single artifact. It had been about courage, trust, responsibility, and the importance of preserving what is meaningful. The women began preparing the artifact for transfer to the community members who had been waiting in the area. John helped where he could, his hands steady, his mind focused. Despite the tension and fatigue of the past days, he felt a deep sense of peace. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and danger, and he had emerged stronger, wiser, and more aware of the world around him. When the community members arrived, there was a quiet ceremony of gratitude and respect. The artifact was received with reverence, and the women shared stories of the journey, of the challenges they had faced, and of the importance of preserving history. John watched, feeling both humility and pride. He had played a role in something extraordinary, something that would be remembered not only by the women but by the community whose heritage it represented. After the transfer, the women turned to John. Their expressions were calm, yet filled with appreciation. "You have been a true friend and ally," the first woman said. "Without your guidance, courage, and dedication, this journey would not have succeeded. We are grateful for your help, John Miller." John felt a warmth in his chest. He had never sought recognition or reward, but the acknowledgement from these women, strangers who had become teachers, guides, and companions, was deeply meaningful. He realized that the journey had changed him in ways he could never have imagined. He had learned to trust himself, to act with courage, and to understand the importance of heritage, history, and human connection. As the sun set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, John and the women took a moment to reflect. They shared quiet words, laughter, and memories of the challenges they had faced together. John felt a profound sense of completion. The journey had tested him, taught him, and ultimately transformed him. He understood that life's extraordinary moments often arrive unexpectedly, bringing lessons, growth, and connection in their wake. The women prepared to depart, their journey continuing to ensure the artifact reached its final home safely. John walked with them to the edge of the town, feeling a mixture of gratitude and sadness. He had grown attached to these women, admired their strength, and been inspired by their courage. Their presence in his life had been brief, yet profoundly impactful. "Thank you, John," the first woman said softly. "You have shown that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they act with courage, integrity, and respect. Never forget that your actions matter and that you are capable of more than you know." John nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. He realized that he would never forget this journey, these women, or the lessons he had learned. The quiet man who had once lived a predictable life had been transformed into someone who understood bravery, responsibility, and the importance of preserving what truly matters. As the women disappeared into the distance, John stood silently, watching them go. The forest and the town around him seemed peaceful once more, yet he knew that Cedar Hollow had been forever changed, not just by their presence, but by the story they had created together. He felt a quiet pride, knowing that he had been part of something meaningful, something that would endure beyond his lifetime. Returning to his home, John reflected on the journey. He thought about the courage it took to face the unknown, the patience required to navigate danger, and the wisdom the women had shared. He realized that the mission had been more than a physical challenge. It had been a journey of the heart, mind, and spirit. He had discovered his own strength, learned to trust others, and gained an appreciation for the depth of history and culture that shapes communities and identities. In the weeks that followed, John returned to his quiet routines, but his perspective had changed. He walked through Cedar Hollow with a new awareness, noticing the hidden stories in the town, the strength in ordinary people, and the value of connection and respect. Though life continued with its everyday rhythms, John carried with him the lessons of the journey, the courage, patience, and wisdom he had witnessed and embodied. The appearance of the 5 Apache women at his door had been unexpected, mysterious, and even frightening at first. Yet, through their guidance and trust, John had discovered something profound about himself and the world around him. He understood that extraordinary experiences can arrive when we least expect them, and that sometimes the most meaningful journeys are those that challenge us, teach us, and leave us forever changed. John never forgot the women, the artifact, or the journey. Cedar Hollow, once ordinary and predictable, now held a story of courage, trust, and connection, a story that would be whispered among townspeople for years to come. And John Miller, the quiet man who had opened his door that fateful evening, had become a part of that story, carrying its lessons, memories, and inspiration with him for the rest of his life. In the end, the journey had taught John that courage is not the absence of fear, that trust can bridge worlds, and that even the smallest actions can have lasting impact. The women had come into his life unexpectedly, but their presence had changed him forever. And as he watched the stars twinkle in the night sky over Cedar Hollow, John felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that he had witnessed and been part of something truly extraordinary.